At Lincoln High, a big school in the middle of the city, life was never boring. The hallways buzzed with chatter, lockers slammed shut, and students rushed from one class to another. Among them was a girl who stood out, not because she was loud or flashy, but because she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her name wasn't important, but her story would soon become unforgettable. This particular afternoon started like any other. The final bell had rung, and students poured out of classrooms, eager to get home or hang out with friends. She was walking down the stairs, her backpack slung over one shoulder, thinking about her plans for the evening. Maybe she'd finish her homework early, or maybe she'd call her mom to see how her day went. But as she reached the middle of the stairwell, something stopped her in her tracks. Blocking her way at the bottom of the stairs was someone everyone knew, the kind of person no one wanted to cross paths with unless they absolutely had to. This girl was tall, always dressed in designer clothes, and walked around like she owned the place. People called her the Queen Bee behind her back because she acted like she ruled the school. She wasn't just popular, she was feared. And right now she was glaring up at the girl on the stairs like she'd caught her doing something wrong. "Hey, you!" the Queen Bee shouted, her voice sharp enough to make heads turn. A few students slowed down to watch, curious about what was happening. Others lingered nearby, pretending not to listen while secretly hoping for some drama. The girl froze, gripping the railing tightly. What did she want? They didn't even know each other that well. Sure, they'd passed each other in the halls before, but they weren't friends or enemies for that matter. Still, there was no mistaking the tone in the Queen Bee's voice. It was accusing, almost venomous. "I know you took it," the Queen Bee continued, pointing a finger straight at her. "My phone is gone and I saw you near my locker earlier." The accusation hit like a punch to the gut. The girl blinked, stunned. "What?" she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't take your phone. I don't even know where your locker is." But the Queen Bee wasn't listening. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. Her friends gathered around her, forming a wall of judgmental stares. "Oh, come on," the Queen Bee sneered. "Don't play dumb. Everyone knows people like you can't resist taking things that don't belong to them." The words stung more than anything else could have. They weren't just an accusation. They were laced with prejudice, assumptions based on nothing but appearances. The girl felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. For a moment, she thought about walking away, ignoring the whole thing. But then she realized something. If she left now, the Queen Bee would win. Worse, others might start believing her lies. Her heart raced as she looked around at the growing crowd. Some faces were sympathetic, but most were curious, waiting to see what would happen next. She couldn't let this moment define her. She had worked too hard to let someone tear her down like this. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. Instead of yelling back or breaking down, she did something unexpected. Slowly, deliberately, she set her backpack on the ground and unzipped it. "Fine," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the storm inside her. "Look inside if you think I stole your phone." The Queen Bee hesitated, clearly thrown off by the calm response. After a moment, she stepped forward and peered into the bag. All she found were textbooks, notebooks, and a water bottle. No phone. For a second, silence filled the stairwell. Then the girl spoke again, her voice stronger this time. "You've been trying to make me feel less than for years because of how I look and where I come from. But guess what? I'm still here, and I'm not afraid of you." Her words echoed through the space, silencing even the whispers of the onlookers. For the first time, the Queen Bee looked unsure of herself. And in that moment, the girl realized she had the upper hand. To truly understand what happened in that stairwell, you'd need to go back a little further. The tension between the two girls didn't just appear out of nowhere. It had been building for years, simmering beneath the surface like an unspoken feud. The girl who stood accused wasn't someone who sought attention or trouble. She kept to herself most of the time, focusing on her studies and helping her mom at home. Her life wasn't easy. Her family lived paycheck to paycheck, and she often wore clothes from thrift stores, but she didn't let that stop her. She worked hard, stayed out of drama, and tried to keep her head high, even when people whispered behind her back. On the other hand, the queen bee of the school came from a completely different world. Her parents were wealthy, always donating money to the school to fund new programs or shiny renovations. Because of this, she walked around with a sense of entitlement, as if the rules didn't apply to her. She was used to getting her way, whether it was through charm, manipulation, or sheer intimidation. Their paths rarely crossed directly, but whenever they did, there was always an undercurrent of hostility. It wasn't anything major at first, just small comments here and there. A snide remark about how some people can't afford designer bags during class discussions. A condescending laugh when someone mentioned working part-time after school. These little jabs weren't aimed solely at one person. They were meant to make anyone who didn't fit into her idea of perfect feel inferior. But over time, those comments started adding up. For the girl being accused now, each insult felt like another brick in a wall slowly closing in around her. There was the time someone overheard the queen bee mocking her hairstyle, calling it messy, and saying it looked like she didn't even own a comb. Then there were the whispers about her second-hand sneakers, which somehow became a topic of conversation in the cafeteria one day. Each word stung, not because they were true, but because they were designed to cut deep, and yet she refused to let those words break her. Instead, she channeled her energy into proving herself, not to others, but to herself. She studied harder, joined clubs, and volunteered in the community. Every achievement was a reminder that she was worth more than the cruel labels people tried to slap on her. Still, none of that prepared her for moments like this one in the stairwell. This wasn't just another careless comment. It was a full-blown accusation, loud enough for everyone to hear. As the crowd grew around them, she realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every stereotype, every unfair assumption, and every hurtful thing that had ever been said to her or anyone else like her. She thought about all the times she'd seen others treated the same way. Students who sat quietly in class, while others mocked their accents, kids who got teased for bringing homemade lunches instead of buying cafeteria food, or anyone who dared to stand out in a way that made them targets. The queen bee's words weren't just directed at her, they represented a larger pattern of behavior that needed to be called out. That realization hit her like a lightning bolt. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was standing up for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. And once she understood that, fear began to melt away. In its place came determination. If she didn't say something now, if she didn't push back against this kind of treatment, then nothing would change. The cycle would continue, and the next person might not have the strength to fight back. As the queen bee stood there, still glaring at her, the girl took a moment to steady herself. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, watching, waiting. But instead of shrinking under the pressure, she straightened her shoulders and looked the queen bee right in the eye. This wasn't going to be like all the other times, when she'd silently endured the insults. No, this time was different. This time she was ready to speak up, and what she said next would leave everyone speechless. The girl stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, but her face calm and composed. She had already unzipped her backpack, offering the queen bee a chance to dig through it if she wanted. But that wasn't all she had planned. This moment wasn't just about proving her innocence, it was about showing everyone what kind of person she really was. As the queen bee hesitated, clearly thrown off by how collected she seemed, the girl took a step forward. Not too close, just enough to make sure everyone could hear her. "You think I'm scared of you?" she asked, her voice steady and strong. The question caught the queen bee off guard. She blinked, unsure how to respond. The crowd around them grew quieter, sensing that something bigger was about to happen. Some students leaned against the stairwell railing while others pressed closer, their phones out to record the scene. No one wanted to miss this. Without waiting for an answer, the girl reached into her pocket and pulled out her own phone. It was old, with scratches on the screen and a cracked corner where she'd dropped it once. But it worked fine, and more importantly, It gave her an idea. She opened the school's social media app, a platform every student used, and started recording. "Let me tell you something," she began, looking directly at the camera. Her tone shifted slightly, becoming less personal and more like she was addressing everyone who might watch this later. "This isn't just about some missing phone. This is about respect, or the lack of it." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "For years, people like her," she gestured toward the queen bee without naming her, "have been making assumptions about me because of how I look, where I come from, and what I wear. And today, she accused me of stealing her phone loudly. Enough for everyone to hear. Why? Because apparently being black means I must be guilty." Her voice didn't waver, even though inside she felt a storm of emotions. She knew these words would spread far beyond the stairwell. She could see the shock on some faces, the discomfort on others. But she also saw nods of agreement, especially from students who had faced similar treatment themselves. "This isn't okay," she continued, her gaze shifting between the camera and the growing audience around her. "It's not okay to judge someone based on stereotypes. It's not okay to treat people like they're less than human because their lives are different from yours. And it's definitely not okay to accuse someone of something they didn't do just to save face." By now, the video had hundreds of views online. Students watching live were commenting furiously, sharing their own stories of unfair treatment or cheering her on. The hashtag #NotYourSpeakUp started trending almost instantly, but she wasn't done yet. Lowering her phone slightly, she turned back to the queen bee. "You want to know why your phone is missing? Maybe it's because you're so busy judging everyone else that you can't keep track of your own stuff. Or maybe someone finally decided you deserved a taste of your own medicine." The queen bee's cheeks flushed red, whether from anger or embarrassment, no one could tell. Her friends exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to defend her or back away. For the first time, she looked uncertain, like the ground beneath her feet was shaking. The girl pressed on, knowing this was her chance to say everything she'd kept bottled up for years. "I've seen you tear people down for fun. I've heard the things you say behind closed doors. You act like you're better than everyone, but guess what? You're not. You're just somebody who thinks hurting others makes you stronger. But it doesn't. It makes you weak." Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Even the spectators who had initially come for drama were now silent, absorbing every sentence. Some nodded along, while others whispered to each other, realizing they weren't alone in feeling hurt by the queen bee's behavior. And then, just when it seemed like she couldn't possibly say anything more powerful, she added one final thought. "If you want to find your phone, stop blaming innocent people and start looking at yourself. That's where the real problem lies." With that, she stopped recording and slipped her phone back into her pocket. The silence in the stairwell was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone was processing what had just happened. The queen bee stared at her, speechless, as if she couldn't believe what she'd just witnessed. For the girl, the weight of standing up to someone who had always intimidated her lifted just a little. She didn't feel afraid anymore. Instead, she felt free. Free from the fear of being judged, free from the shame of staying silent, and free to show the world exactly who she was. Someone who refused to be pushed around. She picked up her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and walked past the stunned crowd. As she climbed the remaining stairs and disappeared into the hallway, the whispers began again. But this time they weren't about her. They were about the courage it took to stand up to someone who thought they were untouchable. What happened next would change Lincoln High forever. But for now, the girl smiled to herself, knowing she'd done something remarkable. She hadn't just defended herself, she'd sparked a conversation that needed to happen. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The video of the girl's speech in the stairwell went viral almost instantly. By the time she got home that evening, it had already racked up thousands of views, likes, and comments. Students from Lincoln High weren't the only ones watching. It had spread beyond the school, reaching alumni, parents, and even people who didn't know her personally but were inspired by what they saw. The next morning, the atmosphere at school was electric. Everyone was talking about what happened. Groups of students huddled together in hallways, whispering excitedly or debating whether the queen bee would ever recover from being called out so publicly. Teachers tried to keep things under control during class, but their efforts were half-hearted. Most of them knew this was a moment bigger than any lesson plan. For the queen bee, life as she knew it crumbled overnight. She walked into school that day with her usual air of confidence, expecting the world to bend to her will like it always did. But something was different. The stares she received weren't admiring anymore. They were judgmental. People avoided making eye contact with her, and when they did, it wasn't friendly. Even her closest friends seemed distant, unsure how to act around someone whose reputation had taken such a massive hit. Her first instinct was to fight back. During lunch, she gathered her clique in the corner of the cafeteria and tried to paint herself as the victim. "She ambushed me," she told them, her voice sharp with frustration. "She recorded everything without giving me a chance to explain. That's not fair." But her words fell flat. Some of her friends nodded along out of habit, but others just stared at their food, clearly uncomfortable. One of them finally spoke up. Maybe she had a point," they said quietly. "You've said some pretty harsh things to people before. Maybe it's time we all owned up to that." The queen bee blinked, stunned. For years, she'd been untouchable, protected by her status and the fear she inspired in others. But now, for the first time, she realized her power was slipping away. Her friends weren't defending her like they used to. Strangers online were calling her out, criticizing her behavior, and sharing stories of times she'd bullied them too. It felt like the entire school, and maybe even the world, was turning against her. Meanwhile, the girl who stood up to her became an accidental hero. Students who had barely noticed her before started approaching her in the halls, thanking her for speaking up. Some admitted they'd been too scared to confront the queen bee themselves, while others shared their own experiences of feeling judged or mistreated. It was overwhelming at times, but also empowering. She hadn't expected her actions to resonate with so many people, but now that they had, she felt a responsibility to keep pushing for change. Parents and teachers began taking notice too. A group of concerned moms and dads sent emails to the principal demanding action, asking why bullying had been allowed to fester unchecked for so long. Alumni flooded social media with memories of similar incidents, urging current students to hold each other accountable. Even local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a turning point for Lincoln High, a chance to address deep-rooted issues of inequality and prejudice within its walls. The administration scrambled to respond. At first, they tried to downplay the situation, issuing vague statements about promoting kindness and fostering respect. But the backlash was fierce. Parents accused them of ignoring the problem for years, while students organized protests outside the main office, holding signs that read, "We deserve better," and "Justice starts here." Under mounting pressure, the school announced a series of changes. They promised to implement stricter anti-bullying policies, provide training for teachers on recognizing bias, and create a student-led diversity council to ensure voices from all backgrounds were heard. While some praised these steps as progress, others remained skeptical, warning that promises alone wouldn't fix years of neglect. Amidst all the chaos, the queen bee made one last attempt to salvage her image. Days after the incident, she approached the girl during lunch looking nervous and awkward. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "I shouldn't have accused you like that. It wasn't much." An apology muttered under her breath, but it was a start. The girl looked at her for a long moment, considering her words. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said simply. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the queen bee standing there, unsure of what to do next. That brief exchange marked a turning point, not just for the two of them, but for the entire school. Conversations that had once been avoided were now happening openly. Students began calling out discriminatory behavior when they saw it, refusing to let toxic attitudes slide. Teachers paid closer attention to dynamics in their classrooms, stepping in when necessary to remind everyone of the importance of mutual respect. Slowly but surely, Lincoln High started to transform. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still battles to be fought, But the seeds of change had been planted, and at the center of it all was the girl who refused to stay silent. Her courage had ignited a movement, proving that one person really could make a difference. As the weeks went by, she found herself smiling more often. The weight of carrying past hurts began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. Together, she and her classmates were building something better, a community where everyone belonged, no matter who they were or where they came from. And though she never sought fame or recognition, she couldn't help but feel proud of what she'd accomplished. After all, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up and speak your truth, even if it means facing the entire world. The days following the Stairwell incident were unlike anything Lincoln High had ever seen. The school buzzed with energy, but it wasn't the usual chaotic chatter about sports games or weekend plans. It was deeper than that. Conversations revolved around accountability, respect, and the kind of environment students wanted to create for themselves. It was as if a dam had burst, releasing years of pent-up frustration and unspoken truths. For the girl who had stood up in the stairwell, life became both exhilarating and overwhelming. She couldn't walk down a hallway without someone stopping her to say how much they admired her courage. Some shared their own stories of being bullied or judged unfairly, while others simply thanked her for giving them hope. At first, she felt uncomfortable with all the attention. She hadn't done this for recognition. She'd done it because she couldn't stay silent anymore. But as time went on, she realized something important. Her actions had given others permission to speak. Up too. Inspired by her bravery, a group of students came together to form what they called the Unity Council. Their goal was simple yet ambitious: to make Lincoln High a place where everyone felt safe and valued. They held meetings after school, brainstorming ideas for workshops, campaigns, and events that would bring students closer together. One of their first initiatives was a wall of voices, where anyone could post anonymous notes sharing their experiences with discrimination or bullying. Within days, the wall was covered with messages, some heartbreaking, some hopeful, all powerful. Teachers noticed the shift too. For years, many of them had turned a blind eye to the subtle and sometimes not so subtle tensions between students, telling themselves it wasn't their place to intervene. But now they couldn't ignore it anymore. During class discussions, teachers began encouraging students to talk openly about issues like racism, privilege, and inequality. These conversations weren't always easy. There were moments of discomfort, even arguments, but they were necessary. Slowly, students started seeing each other not just as classmates, but as individuals with unique struggles and perspectives. The queen bee, meanwhile, struggled to find her footing in this new reality. Her apology to the girl had been a small step, but it wasn't enough to undo years of harmful behavior. Many students still distrusted her, and her attempts to rebuild friendships often fell flat. Some of her former allies distanced themselves entirely, unwilling to associate with someone whose reputation had become so tarnished. Others stuck by her side, though their loyalty seemed more out of obligation than genuine support. At first, she tried to reclaim her old status by doubling down on her usual tactics, gossiping, manipulating, and throwing shade at anyone who crossed her path. But it didn't work. People saw through her act now, and instead of cowering, they pushed back. When she made a snide comment about someone's clothes during lunch, another student shot back, "Why don't you focus on yourself for once?" The room erupted in laughter, leaving her red-faced and humiliated. Eventually, she stopped trying to fight it. Instead, she retreated into herself, spending less time in crowded hallways and more time alone. Some might have called it karma, but the girl who stood up to her refused to gloat. "She's human, just like the rest of us," she told her friends when they pressed her for details. "I'm not here to ruin her life. I just want her to understand what it feels like to be treated unfairly." As weeks turned into months, the changes at Lincoln High became undeniable. The Unity Council organized its first major event, a school-wide assembly focused on diversity and inclusion. Students performed spoken-word poetry, shared personal essays, and led discussions about how to build a stronger community. Teachers, invited guest speakers from local organizations to talk about overcoming prejudice and standing up for justice. By the end of the day, there wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. Even the administration got involved, albeit reluctantly at first. After facing intense pressure from parents and students, they finally committed to meaningful change. Anti-bullying policies were updated to include stricter consequences for discriminatory behavior. Mandatory training sessions were introduced for staff and faculty, focusing on recognizing bias and fostering empathy. A suggestion box was placed near the principal's office, allowing students to voice concerns anonymously without fear of retaliation. Through it all, the girl remained at the heart of the movement, not as its leader, but as its spark. She never sought the spotlight, preferring to let others take center stage whenever possible. Still, people looked to her for guidance, knowing she had the wisdom and strength to navigate difficult situations. Her confidence grew with each passing day, fueled by the knowledge that she was making a difference, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. One afternoon, as she sat in the library working on an essay, a freshman approached her hesitantly. "Can I ask you something?" the younger student said, fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. The girl smiled warmly. "Of course." "I heard what you did in the stairwell," the freshman continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I just wanted to say thank you. You showed me that it's okay to stand up for myself even when it's scary." The girl felt a lump rise in her throat. She reached out and gave the freshman's hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. "And you don't have to face anything alone. We've got your back." Moments like these reminded her why she'd chosen to speak up in the first place. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but it was worth it. Every conversation, every policy change, every act of kindness brought them one step closer to creating a school where no one had to feel invisible or unworthy. As graduation approached, the girl reflected on everything that had happened since that day in the stairwell. She thought about the challenges she'd faced, the friendships she'd formed, and the legacy she hoped to leave behind. Lincoln High wasn't perfect. It might never be, but it was better than it had been before. And that was enough. On her final day at the school, she stood in front of her peers during the closing ceremony, delivering a speech that left everyone inspired. She talked about resilience, about using your voice for good, and about the power of standing together. As she walked off stage to thunderous applause, she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the end of her journey, it was only the beginning. By the time graduation rolled around, Lincoln High felt like a completely different place. The changes weren't just surface level, they ran deep, touching every corner of the school and reshaping how students interacted with one another. It wasn't perfect, of course. No institution ever is. But there was a sense of progress, a shared understanding that everyone had a role to play in making things better. The girl who had once stood silently in the stairwell, accused and humiliated, now walked across the stage as one of the most celebrated members of her class. Her name was called, and she stepped forward, her cap slightly tilted to the side, a wide smile lighting up her face. As she shook hands with the principal and accepted her diploma, the crowd erupted into cheers louder than for anyone else. Students clapped, whistled, and even chanted her initials, a testament to the impact she'd made not just on her peers but on the entire school community. But it wasn't just about her. The Unity Council she'd inspired continued to thrive, organizing events and initiatives that brought people together. There were workshops where students learned about cultural differences, art exhibits showcasing diverse perspectives, and fundraisers to support local charities. Even the annual talent show took on new meaning, becoming a platform for underrepresented voices to shine. Every project they launched reinforced the idea that Lincoln High belonged to everyone, not just the privileged few. As for the Queen Bee, she graduated quietly, slipping out of the spotlight she'd once dominated. She didn't give a speech or receive any special awards. Instead, she kept to herself, avoiding eye contact with most people. Some might have seen this as punishment, but others, including the girl who had confronted her, felt differently. "Change takes time," she often said when asked about it. She's got a long way to go, but at least she knows now what it feels like to be judged unfairly. Maybe someday she'll use that lesson to help someone else. The real magic, though, happened outside the walls of Lincoln High. The video from the Stairwell incident had sparked conversations far beyond the school grounds. Alumni reached out, sharing their own stories of bullying and discrimination. Parents wrote heartfelt letters to the administration, thanking them for finally addressing issues they'd worried about for years. Local media covered the transformation at Lincoln High, highlighting it as an example of what could happen when students stood together against injustice. Even online, the movement gained momentum. The hashtag #TheSpeakUp trended for weeks, inspiring students from other schools to share their experiences and demand change in their own communities. Teachers across the country downloaded lesson plans created by the Unity Council, using them to teach their classes about empathy and inclusion. What started as a single act of courage in a dimly lit stairwell had grown into something much bigger, a ripple effect that showed no signs of stopping. On her final day at Lincoln High, the girl spent hours walking through the halls, taking it all in. She visited the Wall of Voices, now filled with hundreds of notes written by students over the months. Some messages were heartbreaking. "I've been called names for wearing hand-me-downs." Others were hopeful. "Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." And then there were those that simply said, "We're better than this." She paused in front of the Unity Council's bulletin board, which displayed photos from their latest event, a community cleanup day where dozens of students came together to beautify the neighborhood around the school. In one picture, she saw herself laughing with classmates, paint smeared across her cheeks. It was a moment of pure joy, captured forever. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she joined a group of friends on the football field for an impromptu celebration. Someone had brought a speaker and music played softly in the background while they talked about the future. College plans, dreams, fears, it all came pouring out under the stars. One of her closest friends turned to her and said, "You know, none of this would have happened without you. You changed everything." She shook her head, smiling. "No, we did it together. I just refused to stay quiet, that's all." Her friend nodded thoughtfully. "Still, it takes guts to do what you did. Most people wouldn't have." For a moment, she let herself think about how far she'd come. From the days of feeling invisible and unworthy to standing on stage accepting her diploma amidst thunderous applause. It was a journey she never could have imagined. Yet here she was, surrounded by people who cared about her, ready to take on whatever came next. When the night ended and everyone went their separate ways, she lingered on the field a little longer. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos, stopping at one taken during the Unity Council's first meeting. Back then, she hadn't known if anyone would listen. Now, looking at the faces in the photo, she realized how wrong she'd been. People had listened, and more importantly, they'd acted. She typed out a quick message to her mom. "Made it. Couldn't have done it without you cheering me on every step of the way." Her mom replied almost instantly. "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. Go get 'em, champ." With that, she tucked her phone back into her pocket and took one last look at the school. Tomorrow she'd start packing for college, preparing for a new chapter in her life. But tonight she allowed herself to savor the moment, to feel proud of everything she'd accomplished and excited for what lay ahead. As she walked toward the parking lot, the lights of Lincoln High glowing behind her, she whispered to herself, "This isn't the end, it's just the beginning." And with that, she stepped into the future knowing she'd left her mark, not just on Lincoln High but on the world.